Hi, I'm Edna. My sister once stood in front of our whole family and called me a disgrace, at a party meant to celebrate family values. But what none of them expected was that her fiancé would greet me with two words that changed everything: Your Honor. It wasn't just one insult that night. It was years of betrayal, quiet erasure, the way they tried to erase my worth when no one was looking. How did it come to this? And why was the truth so much heavier than the lies? Morning light poured through the thin curtains of my small home office in Charleston, South Carolina, casting a muted glow over stacks of court briefs and unopened mail. The air was crisp for early fall, a rare relief from the lingering southern heat. As I sifted through the morning's clutter, my fingers paused on a cream-colored envelope nestled between bills and judicial notices. It wasn't the thickness of the paper that made my hand tremble. It was the embossed crest of the Voss family, so familiar yet so foreign now. The past clawed its way to the surface, scraping against old scars I'd buried under years of self-built dignity. I sat down heavily at my worn oak desk, staring at the envelope like it might explode. My thumb traced the elegant calligraphy spelling out my full name, Edna Marie Voss. Like I was still one of them. Like I hadn't been cast out, labeled a disgrace, a failure, an embarrassment to a family obsessed with maintaining a public facade. It took longer than it should have to slide a letter opener beneath the flap. Inside was a formal, sterile invitation to Claudine's wedding. My sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Beneath the thick cardstock, something fluttered out, a smaller slip of paper in rushed handwriting. Please come, I miss you. Mom. For a moment, the breath left my body entirely. It wasn't the invitation that undid me. It was that note, that tiny, desperate plea from the woman who had once stood silent while my father disowned me at a crowded family dinner. The same mother who'd never called, never written, until now. I pressed the note against my chest, squeezing my eyes shut. Memories bled in, my father's cold, clipped voice. You are no daughter of mine if you won't uphold the Voss legacy. Claudine's mocking laugh, cutting across the silence like a blade. You're pathetic, Edna. Always have been. I shook my head sharply, forcing the past back into its coffin. It wasn't that easy anymore. I wasn't that broken girl trembling at the family table. Not after building a life they swore I'd never have. Hours blurred together. I sat at the kitchen table, invitation and note side by side, turning them over like they might reveal some hidden answer. Pride warred with a strange, aching longing. Did I even want to be seen by them again? Did I need their validation after all I'd accomplished without them? By late afternoon, the sky over Charleston bruised with streaks of purple and gold. The streets buzzed with weekend tourists, but my world stayed eerily still. I watched the sunlight fade, and still the invitation remained unopened on the table, daring me to make a choice. The logical part of me screamed to ignore it. Let them stew in their curated perfection without me. But another part, the small, stubborn voice that had carried me through law school nights alone, had seen me through empty Thanksgivings, whispered otherwise. At midnight, I grabbed my jacket and slipped outside. The streets were nearly empty now, washed clean by the faint mist rolling in from the harbor. I walked with no destination, hands jammed deep into my pockets, heart beating an erratic drum against my ribs. Charleston slept, unaware that in one small corner, a war waged. Pride told me to stay away. Integrity told me it didn't matter what they thought. But somewhere deeper, something raw demanded a reckoning, not for them, for me. I stopped under the dull glow of a street lamp and pulled out my phone. The RSVP email stared back at me, waiting. Are you attending? It asked simply. I hovered for a moment, breath misting in the cold night air. Then, with a small, steady nod, I typed, I'll be there. My thumb hit send before I could second-guess myself. The message whooshed into the darkness. No fireworks exploded, no cosmic shift rumbled the earth beneath my feet. Just the quiet, resolute knowledge that there was no turning back now. I pocketed my phone, turned toward home, and took my first step into the storm I knew was waiting. The Charleston night had barely melted into dawn when I woke with a strange clarity buzzing beneath my skin. I'd crossed a threshold the night before, one I couldn't uncross. My bags were already packed before the sun kissed the tips of the palmettos outside my window. No grand ritual, no dramatic pause, just a steady hand zipping up a modest suitcase, courtroom-appropriate attire neatly folded within. A few hours later, my rental car crunched along the winding gravel driveway of the Voss estate. The house loomed ahead like some sleeping giant, elegant, immaculate, and colder than memory allowed. I parked near the edge of the vast manicured lawn, away from the glittering luxury vehicles lined up like peacocks flashing their wealth. Stepping out, I smoothed the front of my deep green dress, a simple but precise choice. No sequins, no plunging neckline, just confidence stitched into clean lines and sharp tailoring. If I was walking into a battle, I would do it armored in my own skin, not their expectations. The late afternoon sun slanted golden across the estate grounds, setting the sprawling tents and floral arches ablaze with light. From a distance, laughter chimed like false bells. Politicians in tailored suits, lawyers with manicured smiles, socialites draped in designer silks, they all milled about, clinking glasses, posing for invisible cameras. I walked forward, head high, refusing to let the weight of their stares slow me down. No one approached me at first. No one dared. And then, across the glittering reception space, a voice cut through the hum of meaningless chatter. "Your Honor, I didn't know you'd be here." Heads turned sharply as if on cue. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne flutes froze mid-air. There he was, Calvin Montgomery, Claudine's fiancé, standing by the fountain with a stunned smile breaking across his face. His blue eyes shone with genuine respect as he crossed the marble terrace toward me, extending a hand like we were meeting at a gala, not amid the battlefield of my family's judgment. I shook his hand firmly, my heart pounding so loudly I feared others could hear it. "Judge Voss," he said, loud enough for half the party to overhear. "It's truly an honor to meet you outside the courtroom." A ripple moved through the gathered crowd like an electric shock. Some guests blinked in confusion. Others exchanged thinly veiled looks of horror. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Claudine, frozen mid-laugh, the perfect mask slipping just enough to reveal the panic underneath. Father's jaw tightened so hard I half expected to hear his molars crack. The Voss name was supposed to conjure images of old money, real estate dynasties, and polished political influence, not scandal, not judicial independence. "Likewise," I said smoothly, ignoring the collective inhale around us. For one glorious moment, standing there under a canopy of fairy lights and forced civility, I wasn't Edna the Disgrace. I was Edna Voss, Your Honor, a woman they'd failed to break. As Calvin drifted away, summoned by an oblivious relative, I remained rooted to the spot, savoring the chaos he'd unknowingly unleashed. Around me, whispers bloomed like weeds through the polished marble. "I thought she was... Did you hear what he called her? Since when is she a judge?" Their confusion was almost sweet. Dinner was a farce of clinking silverware and strained smiles. I was seated near the edge of the main banquet table, a calculated placement to minimize my presence without outright banishing me. Every so often I caught Claudine shooting me panicked glances, her fiancé blissfully ignorant as he charmed donors and local officials. Father sat at the head of the table, face impassive, but his fingers drummed an erratic rhythm against the polished wood. A tell he probably thought he'd outgrown. I barely touched my meal, instead nursing a glass of water and studying the players arrayed before me. After the third awkward course, when guests began shifting in their seats and murmuring about cigars and cocktails, my mother appeared at my side, as if conjured by my silent yearning. Dorothy Voss, queen of the passive smile and the polished deflection. "Walk with me, Edna," she said softly, her voice barely cutting through the din. Without waiting for a reply, she turned toward the side garden. Against every instinct, I rose and followed. The twilight wrapped the hedgerows in muted purples and grays as we moved away from the murmuring crowd. Only when we were safely out of earshot did she stop, turning to face me with a mixture of guilt and something startlingly close to fear. "I sent the invitation," she said quickly, eyes darting to the mansion behind us. "Your father, Claudine? They don't know." I stared at her, words bottling up in my throat. "Why?" I asked finally, voice rougher than I intended. Her hands twisted together, wringing the life out of her diamond bracelet. Because I missed you. Because it was wrong, what we did, how we abandoned you. A gust of wind tousled her carefully pinned hair. For once, she didn't reach up to fix it. I couldn't change his mind back then, she whispered. I should have fought harder. I should have. She shook her head, helpless. I'm sorry, Edna. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the woman who had once been a fortress of silence against my pleas. I wanted to rage. I wanted to demand why it had taken so long, why she'd stood by while I was gutted at that long-ago dinner. But instead, I heard myself say, thank you for inviting me, because maybe some wounds didn't bleed forever. Maybe some cracks let enough light through to build something new. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. Father stepping out onto the veranda, scanning the garden. Our moment was over. Go, I said quietly, before he sees. Dorothy nodded once, sharply, like a soldier receiving orders. Then she turned and walked briskly back toward the house. I stayed rooted among the shadowed hedges, breathing in the heavy scent of magnolias, feeling the aftershock of the night settle deep into my bones. The walls had cracked tonight, but the flood was only beginning. I waited until the last whisper of Mother's perfume vanished into the night air before dragging my feet back toward the glowing estate. The main hall pulsed with the laughter and clinking glasses of a crowd that was too good at pretending. Every step toward the gathering felt heavier, but I forced myself onward, chin up, spine straight, armor fully fastened. The rehearsal dinner was being held in the grand ballroom, a cavernous space lined with crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed drapes, and long tables dripping with fine china. The low murmur of conversation filled the air as servers weaved between guests, their silver trays glinting under the warm lights. I slipped quietly through the double doors, hoping to blend into the background. Instead, as if sensing fresh meat, heads swiveled. Stares pierced the air like tiny darts, none of them subtle, all of them heavy with expectation. Someone coughed pointedly. A few snickered behind their glasses. Ignoring them, I made my way to my assigned seat, on the very end of a long, glittering table where the family's least important members apparently belonged. The tablecloth was so white it almost hurt to look at it. Everything gleamed, polished and sharp, much like the smiles pointed in my direction. I barely had time to sip the water placed in front of me before Claudine's voice, high and brittle, rose above the polite clatter of silverware. "Before dessert," she chirped, tapping a crystal flute with a manicured nail, "I'd like to make a quick toast." Every conversation stopped. The attention, previously scattered, snapped to her like iron filings to a magnet. Standing under the largest chandelier, Claudine looked like a magazine cover, flawless, rehearsed, untouchable. She smiled sweetly at the crowd, then, just briefly, let her gaze flick toward me. Something cold slithered down my spine. She raised her glass high. "Family," she began, her voice syrupy. "It's what binds us, elevates us, and sometimes it defines who among us are truly worthy of the name." The first fissures of unease cracked through the room. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. "Some of us," Claudine continued, turning just slightly so that only I could fully catch the gleam in her eye, "have spent their lives honoring our family's legacy. Others have chosen paths that, well, let's just say, don't quite reflect the standards we all cherish." Laughter, sharp, cruel, almost gleeful, rippled through one corner of the room. Someone at the far end snorted audibly. I caught snatches of whispered remarks. "Such a waste." "Didn't she drop out?" "Couldn't hack it, huh?" My throat tightened, but I refused to look away. Claudine lowered her glass with a delicate clink. "Here's to family, and to always remembering who we are meant to be." Glasses raised hesitantly, awkwardly. A few guests sipped. More just stared. I sat motionless, feeling the weight of 100 silent judgments pressing down on me. My hands clenched under the table, the fabric of my dress crumpling beneath my grip. Breathe. Don't give them the satisfaction. The laughter resumed, harsher now, edged with a cruel glee that thickened the air. Aunt Margot leaned across her plate toward Uncle Victor, stage whispering just loud enough. Well, at least she finally made something of herself, in a courtroom nobody's heard of. She's a judge? Victor chuckled, shaking his head. Bet it's some traffic ticket nonsense. Another ripple of laughter. I sipped my water slowly, letting the icy liquid wash down the bile rising in my throat. You know, said Cousin Philip from 2 seats down, his voice carrying, some people just aren't cut out for greatness. It's sad, really. The humiliation swirled around me, each word a small, precise dagger. Yet outwardly, I remained still, a statue amid the storm. Inside, something began to crack. Not in the way they wanted, not breaking, but breaking free. I straightened my spine, set my glass down with a gentle clink, and rose to my feet. Every eye in the room pivoted toward me. I could almost hear the collective breath hold, the sudden sharpness of attention, as if they sensed they had pushed just a fraction too far. I lifted my own glass, meeting Claudine's startled gaze dead on. To success, I said clearly, my voice slicing through the hush. Success isn't measured by the name you inherit. It's measured by the lives you touch, the dignity you maintain, and the battles you fight quietly when no one's clapping for you. The silence stretched taut, almost unbearable. I took a slow sip, then placed the glass back on the table with deliberate calm. Without another word, I turned and walked the length of the hall, past the gaping mouths and frozen stares, the chandeliers throwing broken light across my path. Not one person dared stop me, not even Father. I didn't need their applause. I needed my own damn dignity. I left the ballroom behind without glancing back, the murmurs of my family folding into a dull, distant hum. By the time I reached the guest house where I'd been assigned to stay for the weekend, the anger inside me had cooled to something sharper, something that didn't burn, but sliced. Sleep came in restless fits, the events of the night playing on a bitter loop behind my closed eyes. When the early light finally crept across the ceiling, I dragged myself out of bed and faced the new day. The breakfast buffet was already underway by the time I entered the main dining hall. It was supposed to be an intimate event for family and close friends, a chance to mingle before the final wedding festivities. Instead, it felt like stepping into a different kind of battlefield. The moment I walked in, the energy shifted. Conversations dipped, just for a beat, before picking up again, too brightly, too artificially. Plates clattered a little too loudly. Chairs scraped across the polished floors. I moved through the room carefully, selecting a plate of eggs and fruit, pretending not to notice the ripple effect of my presence. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught snippets. Did you hear? Fired, they said. Some kind of misconduct? Faked a degree. How embarrassing. Imagine dragging the Voss name through that kind of mud. Each word sliced deeper, though no one dared say them directly to me. It was the kind of calculated cruelty that left no fingerprints but all the bruises. I took a seat at a small, empty table near the window, stabbing a piece of cantaloupe with unnecessary force. Across the room, Claudine laughed too loudly at something Calvin said, her hand brushing his arm possessively. Calvin's smile looked strained. He caught my eye briefly, then looked away just as fast, guilt flashing across his features. So, this was their next move. Discredit me quietly, making sure that by the time the actual wedding rolled around, I would be nothing more than a stain to be hidden under the rug. I pushed my plate aside, appetite gone. Later that afternoon, the family hosted a casual garden luncheon for out-of-town guests, a way to show off the estate's sprawling grounds and lush gardens. Tables were arranged under enormous white tents, the summer breeze heavy with the scent of roses and clipped grass. The hired MC, a local minor celebrity with 2 white teeth and a radio voice, entertained the crowd with rehearsed jokes and anecdotes about love and marriage. It was all harmless enough, until it wasn't. And of course, he drawled, smirking broadly, every family's got that one overachiever. You know, the one who makes us all look bad, or thinks they do. A ripple of laughter. And hey, every family's got a black sheep too, right? The one who gets a little too creative with their resumes. The laughter grew louder, some guests glancing not so subtly in my direction. I sat frozen, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. The MC chuckled. Let's just say, some folks at this party might be better at storytelling than courtroom victories, huh? Aunt Margot leaned in to whisper something to Uncle Victor. He chuckled, wiping his mouth with his napkin. Claudine smiled demurely, feigning innocence behind her champagne glass. The sting was deliberate, precise. A public gutting, but with enough plausible deniability that no one could accuse her of an open attack. I bit the inside of my cheek, forcing my expression to remain neutral. Rising from the table slowly, I walked toward the hedge-lined perimeter of the garden, pretending to admire the roses. I needed the distance, the quiet, the space to think. The humiliation burned in my chest, hot and corrosive. But underneath it, something colder and clearer had started to crystallize. They thought they were burying me. What they didn't realize was that they were handing me the shovel. I could stand here and keep swallowing the poison they spoon-fed me. Or I could start planning my antidote. I leaned against the old stone fountain, watching the sunlight dance on the water's surface. Somewhere deep in my gut, a silent vow began to take root. Next time, I won't just defend myself. Next time, I'll expose them. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. But it would be fought on my terms, not theirs. Across the garden, Claudine's laugh floated toward me again, high, brittle, triumphant. I allowed myself one small smile. Enjoy your victory lap, sister. The race wasn't over yet. The next morning arrived with a heavy, suffocating heat, the kind that pressed down on your skin and seemed to dull the edges of everything around you. I dressed carefully, pulling on a crisp white blouse and black slacks, armor in cotton and thread. The reflection that stared back at me in the guest house mirror was one I barely recognized, calm, composed, but with a hard glint in her eye that hadn't been there before this weekend. The family-only pre-wedding brunch was held in one of the estate's sunrooms, walls of glass letting in too much sunlight, making it feel like being trapped in a gilded cage. Everyone was already gathered when I arrived. Father at the head of the table, Claudine beside him, Calvin stiff at her side. Dorothy sat quietly 2 seats down, her eyes flickering toward me once, filled with something complicated and brittle. The conversation, stiff and forced, circled endlessly around the same themes: legacy, reputation, ambition, all the things I had apparently squandered. I chose a seat at the far end of the table, picking at a croissant I had no intention of eating. It happened so fast, there wasn't even time to brace for it. Edward set down his coffee cup with a decisive clink, cutting through the room's forced chatter like a blade. His gaze locked onto mine, cold, devoid of anything resembling affection. "I want it known," he said, voice loud enough to slice through the polite murmur, "that from this day forward, Edna Voss is no longer considered part of this family's future. She has chosen her own path, and it no longer aligns with the values we uphold." You could feel the air being sucked out of the room. Forks clattered against plates. Someone coughed awkwardly. Claudine sat back in her chair, triumphant, eyes glittering. I sat perfectly still, letting the words hang there, absorbing the sting like a slap across the face. No one came to my defense. Not Calvin, who avoided my eyes. Not my cousins, who busied themselves with their plates. Not even Dorothy, who sat frozen, trembling ever so slightly. I saw it happen before it even fully unfolded. Edward turning to the guests, that politician's smile stretching across his face. "My wife," he said, placing a heavy hand on Dorothy's shoulder, "would like to extend our family's apology for any disruption caused this weekend." Dorothy flinched under his touch but rose obediently, hands wringing the napkin between her fingers like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I'm so sorry for any embarrassment," she mumbled, voice barely carrying across the room. "Edna's choices do not reflect our family's beliefs." My stomach twisted. I wanted to scream, to rip the heavy chandelier from the ceiling and hurl it straight through the glass walls that trapped us in this sick play. But I didn't move. I sat there stone-faced, watching my mother apologize for my existence. Something inside me, something fragile and foolish, finally snapped. I rose to my feet slowly, the chair scraping sharply against the marble floor. All eyes turned to me again. I straightened my spine and smoothed the front of my blouse, feeling every ounce of fury, grief, and betrayal fuse into something colder, something sharper. You can disown me all you want, I said, my voice cutting clear and steady through the stunned silence. You can erase my name from your wills, your speeches, your memories. You can pretend I never existed. I stepped away from the table, the afternoon sunlight catching the silver in my earrings, casting brief flashes of light across the stunned faces staring up at me. But know this, I continued, voice unwavering. You are not erasing me because I failed. You're erasing me because I succeeded without your permission. Aunt Margot gasped softly. Calvin shifted uncomfortably. Claudine's smile faltered. I looked directly at my father. You cannot erase me simply because I outgrew your cage. With that, I turned on my heel and walked out of the sunroom, my steps echoing against the marble like gunshots. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. They had finally drawn their line, and I had drawn mine. The sun was beginning its slow climb higher into the sky as I crossed the gardens back toward the guest wing. The crispness of my earlier defiance still clung to me like an armor, but inside the air felt thinner, heavier, as if some invisible hand was winding the clock tighter and tighter toward an inevitable break. I didn't have to wait long. By midday, Calvin's world cracked open. I found him pacing near the stables, his suit jacket abandoned on a nearby fence post, sleeves rolled up, tie loose around his neck. His face was pale and furious in a way I hadn't seen before, like he was barely holding himself together. "Calvin?" I called carefully, staying a few steps back. He whipped around at the sound of my voice, a sheaf of printed emails clutched in one hand, crumpled and shaking. "They planned it," he said hoarsely. "Your father, Claudine, they planned everything." I took another cautious step forward. "What are you talking about?" Without answering, he shoved the papers into my hands. I scanned them quickly. Internal family emails, whispers of reputation management, fabricated concerns sent anonymously to my judicial ethics board, smear tactics designed to plant doubt in powerful places, fake whistleblowers, forged complaints. All with one aim: destroy my professional standing, strip me of everything I had built. My throat went dry, but I forced myself to meet Calvin's devastated eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice raw. "I didn't know. I should have seen." I folded the papers carefully, feeling a cold clarity settle over me. "This was never about me embarrassing the family," I said quietly. "This was about control, about punishing the one person who refused to play by their rules." Calvin nodded numbly, like he was waking up from a long, ugly dream. He opened his mouth to say something else, but we were interrupted. A text pinged onto my phone. It was from the court's administrative office. Anonymous accusations had been filed against me early that morning, questioning my ethical conduct, suggesting I had taken bribes, that I had perjured myself in a recent case. Lies, every word. But the timing, mere hours after Edward's public disownment, was no coincidence. I closed my eyes for a brief, trembling moment, steadying myself. This was it, the real attack. They weren't satisfied with cutting me out of family photos. They wanted to destroy my life's work too. When I opened my eyes, Calvin was watching me, a question on his face he didn't dare speak aloud. I shook my head. "I'm not running," I said. "Let them try." Later that day, I agreed to meet Edward for a private discussion over lunch. The invitation had come through Dorothy, phrased innocently enough, a chance to clear the air. But the second I stepped into the oak-paneled private dining room of the country club, I knew better. Edward was waiting, seated comfortably, a leather folder resting beside his whiskey glass. He didn't rise to greet me. "Sit," he said. I remained standing. Without preamble, he opened the folder and slid a thick contract across the table toward me. My eyes skimmed the heading, Voss Family Prenuptial Agreement and Public Disclaimer. In short, if I ever married, I was required to sign a document publicly disclaiming any future spouse's claim to the Voss name or fortune. I would also be forced to admit, falsely, that I had struggled with professional misconduct and that the family had been compelled to distance themselves for ethical reasons. It was a formalized character assassination. On paper, forever. I didn't sit. I didn't touch the contract. Instead, I leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. "Is this your idea of closure?" I asked. Edward smirked. "It's protection. From the fallout you're about to bring down on yourself." The gall of it was almost impressive. "You're afraid," I said, voice low but steady. "Afraid that I'll succeed despite you. That people will see through the lies and realize you're nothing but a coward hiding behind a crumbling name." For a moment, just a flicker, I saw something ugly twist across his features. Then it was gone, replaced with bland dismissal. "Sign it," he said, "or don't. Either way, you're out." I picked up the contract with 2 fingers like it was something filthy, tore it neatly down the middle, and dropped the pieces onto the pristine white tablecloth. Edward's face turned a mottled shade of crimson. I turned on my heel and walked out without another word. I found Calvin waiting by the club entrance, a grim look on his face. "How did it go?" he asked. I smiled grimly. "Exactly how it needed to." He nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. "There's something else," he said after a beat. "You need to see this." He pulled out his phone and showed me a string of text messages between Claudine and one of her bridesmaids, gleefully discussing how they'd planted rumors with the media outlets, how they planned to finish what we started before the wedding day. Calvin's hand was trembling. I can't marry her," he said, voice breaking. "I can't be part of this." I placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. "You don't have to," I said. "You have a choice." He looked at me, some old version of loyalty flickering back to life in his eyes. "I stand with you," he said simply. "Whatever comes next." I squeezed his arm once, firmly. This wasn't about romantic alliances anymore. It was about survival, about truth, about burning down a rotten empire so something honest could finally grow. They had underestimated me. That was their first mistake. It would be their last. The sky was a bleak, steely gray as the morning of the wedding crept in. Rain threatened at the edges of the horizon, casting a heavy stillness over the estate that felt less like celebration and more like the eerie calm before a disaster. I stood by my window, arms folded across my chest, watching the staff rush around the courtyard, stringing last-minute white roses and silver ribbons across everything that didn't already scream opulence. Somewhere deep inside, I knew today wouldn't end the way Claudine imagined, and I was ready. Calvin moved faster than anyone expected. At 8 sharp, he called for a private meeting with the family elders. Uncles, aunts, Dorothy, Edward. No Claudine, not yet. I wasn't invited to that meeting, but I didn't need to be. I watched from a distance as Calvin stood at the center of the sunroom, posture ramrod straight, voice calm but cutting. I couldn't hear every word, but the expressions told enough. Shock, horror, rage, and then resignation. Within an hour, word trickled out like water seeping through a cracked dam. The wedding was postponed. Indefinitely. Officially, it was chalked up to irreconcilable differences, but we all knew better. The Voss family's perfect image cracked audibly in the hush that followed. Guests milled around in confusion, women clutching their pearls, men adjusting ties, pretending not to eavesdrop. "Maybe it's cold feet," someone whispered near the fountain. "Maybe the pressure got to him," another murmured over mimosas. But no one bought it. The story didn't fit. Not when Claudine emerged from the house moments later, face ghost pale beneath layers of makeup, eyes darting wild and frantic. Not when Edward stomped across the lawn, jaw tight, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Not when Dorothy sat frozen on a bench, hands folded too tightly in her lap, the whites of her knuckles showing. No, something had detonated, and everyone smelled the smoke. By late afternoon, Calvin made it official. He uploaded screenshots to his social media. Just enough, not too many. Emails between Claudine and Edward, laughing over their plan to sabotage me. Copies of fabricated concerns submitted anonymously to my court's ethics committee. Mock-ups of fake affidavits Claudine had drafted with her bridesmaids as insurance in case Calvin got cold feet. Within an hour, the screenshots went viral. Within 2 hours, a few prominent guests, business magnates, judges, politicians, began quietly withdrawing from the Voss family's business deals. Deals that had taken Edward years to build. Deals that evaporated with a single click, a single public betrayal. The furious text messages started flying shortly after. I didn't bother reading them all. From Claudine, "You ruined everything." From Edward, "You're dead to us." From random cousins and second cousins I barely remembered. "Hope you're happy. I was. Not because I took pleasure in the wreckage, but because it was their own hands that lit the match. All I had done was refuse to smother the flames anymore. Later that night, I sat outside on the stone steps, a blanket draped around my shoulders, sipping a glass of bourbon Calvin had quietly delivered before disappearing into the night. The sky finally opened up in a slow, weeping rain. It felt fitting. Across the yard, the wedding archway stood abandoned, ribbons drooping, flowers battered by the weather. I could hear Claudine screaming somewhere inside the house, wild, hysterical sobs that made no attempt at dignity now. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile either. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival, about dignity reclaimed, about truth finally tearing down the pretty lies they'd wrapped around themselves for so long. I thought back to the girl I'd been all those years ago, the one who had left this place with nothing but a suitcase and a spine she wasn't sure was strong enough. She would have been terrified to face all this, but not the woman I was now. The empire they built on lies was cracking, and I was ready to watch it fall. The first rays of the morning sliced through the low clouds, painting the wet streets of Charleston in gold. I stood at my bathroom mirror, adjusting the simple chain around my neck, my breath steady despite the whirlwind I knew waited just outside. Today wasn't about them anymore. Today was about me. I slid into my navy blue suit, a tailored piece I had bought years ago when I couldn't yet afford it, a silent promise to the woman I hoped I would become. I had no idea then how much that version of me would be needed today. By noon, the Charleston Legal Association's annual award ceremony was packed. Judges, attorneys, community leaders, reporters, some faces I recognized from the wedding debacle, others who had once whispered doubts behind closed doors. Now they sat in neat rows, facing a large stage draped in dignified blue and silver banners. A thick hush filled the room as the keynote speaker, a federal judge whose respect was not given lightly, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice ringing out clear and firm, "today we honor not just professional excellence but resilience, integrity, the kind of courage that reshapes broken systems." And then he said my name, Edna Voss. A ripple ran through the audience, subtle but unmistakable. Some clapped immediately, others hesitated, then joined in. The applause swelled, not polite, not obligatory, but real. When I walked onto that stage, I didn't walk alone. I carried every late night spent clawing through law books, every sneer I'd swallowed, every lie I refused to let define me. And when they handed me the Crystal Award, engraved simply with "for uncompromising integrity and service," I held it high, not for the family name etched behind me in shadows, but for the woman who had fought to stand here without it. For once, the cameras didn't snap for Edward Voss. They snapped for me. The irony was not lost on me. The same crowd that had once celebrated Claudine's engagement now celebrated my survival. Meanwhile, across town, desperation has a smell. And that afternoon, Claudine's PR campaign launched in a pitiful, shrieking attempt to rewrite history. A glossy Instagram post, her smiling weakly with the caption, "Sometimes family envy destroys what love builds," praying for healing and forgiveness. Fake tearful interviews planted in local blogs. Anonymous friends hinting that I had manipulated events, that poor Claudine had been blindsided by her own loyalty. But this time, the internet didn't play along. It didn't take long for real reporters, the kind Claudine hadn't bribed or bullied, to dig deeper. Screenshots resurfaced. Whistleblower accounts appeared. Staffers who once worked the Voss campaigns anonymously confirmed details. Within 24 hours, Claudine's name became a punchline on Twitter. "Might want to invest in better lies next time, sweetie," one viral post read, racking up thousands of likes. Public sympathy didn't just shift, it snapped like a rubber band. Suddenly, I wasn't the black sheep. I was the phoenix, the survivor, the cautionary tale everyone now wanted to quote when speaking about perseverance and integrity. And Claudine? She faded. Not in fire, not in drama, just in the slow, painful silence reserved for those whose masks finally slip, and nobody cares enough to help them pick it back up. That evening, I sat alone on the wide marble steps of the courthouse, my award resting beside me, the city humming quietly around me. The sunset burned low against the horizon, bleeding into the dark. It should have felt like total victory, and in some ways, it did. But there was a hollow too, small and sharp, tucked into the corners of my chest. Winning hadn't erased the scars. It hadn't brought back the years I'd lost to fighting for scraps of love from people incapable of giving it. I traced the rim of my glass with one fingertip, thinking about Dorothy, about the hesitant apology pressed into my hand like a guilty gift, about Calvin, still picking up the broken pieces of his own betrayal. We had survived. But none of us walked away unmarked. Still, for the first time in my life, the future didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a blank page. And I would choose the story that came next. Not them. Not anymore. The spring air smelled different that day. Warmer. Cleaner somehow. Like the kind of morning you only got after a long, violent storm had finally spent itself. I tucked the newspaper under my arm, another article featuring my name, this time on the front page, and turned down the narrow brick path toward a familiar house. Dorothy's house. The place where so much silence had lived for so long. She had invited me for tea, no expectations, no grand reconciliations demanded, just tea. I almost hadn't come, but something in the way she had asked, plain, human, without pretense, had made me say yes. The screen door creaked as I stepped onto the porch. Dorothy opened it before I could knock. She looked older than I remembered, shoulders a little more stooped, eyes ringed with a weariness that hadn't been there before. But there was something else, too, something raw, something real. "Come in, Edna," she said quietly. The living room hadn't changed much. Same worn floral couch, same chipped family portraits lining the mantel. Only now the house didn't feel like it was holding its breath. We sat across from each other at the coffee table, two mismatched mugs between us. For a while we just sipped, listened to the birds outside. Finally, Dorothy set her cup down with a small clink. "I owe you an apology," she said, voice trembling. I looked at her, waiting. Not just for the past few months, for all of it, for standing by while he... She swallowed hard. "I was afraid. I let my fear make me small, and that cost you more than I can ever make right." My throat tightened, but I stayed silent, letting her say it all. "I want you to know," she continued, blinking rapidly, "that I am proud of you, not because you fought them, not because you won, but because you became someone who didn't let them define you." She reached into a drawer by her side and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been saving this," she said, sliding it across the table. "It belonged to your grandfather. He wanted you to have it one day." Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was an old gold pocket watch. Engraved on the back were the words, "Stand tall." The air seemed to thicken around me. I closed the box carefully, hands steady. "Thank you," I said, voice low but sure. And I meant it. Not because her words erased the years. They didn't. They never could. But because she had finally seen me. Later that week. The recognition came quietly but publicly. A formal announcement from the National Judicial Board. Edna Voss, honored for exemplary service and commitment to ethical practice in law. Photos ran in major papers. Editorials praised my work. Community leaders sent letters. I wasn't Edward Voss's daughter anymore. I was Edna Voss, on my own terms, by my own making. At a small reception organized by my colleagues, I stood at the podium, looking out over a sea of faces, some new, some old, all smiling without agenda. I spoke plainly. Integrity isn't inherited, it's built, brick by brick, day by day, even when no one's looking. The applause was genuine, warm, and it didn't feel hollow this time. It felt earned. And the family? I kept my distance. Dorothy and I found a quiet rhythm, occasional lunches, cautious phone calls. Edward, Claudine. They remained names attached to an old pain I no longer fed. I didn't wish them harm, but I didn't invite them into my future either. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some doors need to stay closed for the sake of the soul that survived what happened behind them. Family, I realized, isn't about blood. It's about choice, about respect, about finding or building the people who stand with you, not against you, when the world tilts sideways. One quiet evening, I sat on my porch, the same pocket watch ticking steadily in my hand, the sky above me stained purple with sunset. No wars left to fight, no battles left to win, just the open, wild possibility of what came next. I wasn't a disgrace. I was a survivor. And now, I was free. Maybe that's the real victory. It's not about making everyone who doubted you finally believe. It's about standing tall even when they don't. It's about choosing yourself, even when nobody else will. And it's about learning that sometimes, the family you choose matters more than the one you're born into. If my story means anything, it's this. You are not defined by the voices that tried to drown you out. You are defined by the fire you keep alive inside you, quietly, stubbornly, gloriously, until the day the world has no choice but to see it. We all carry scars, but scars aren't shameful. They're proof we fought, survived, and became more than what tried to break us. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from something or someone to truly find yourself? Or maybe you're still standing at that crossroads, wondering if you're strong enough. Trust me, you are. If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 inch in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. If you didn't vibe with it, I still want to hear your thoughts. What part didn't click with you? Let's connect and grow together. And hey, if you want more stories that hit where it matters most, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let's keep building a space where real stories, real lessons, and real strength are celebrated. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, stay you.